Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today on the Funny Business Podcast. For those at home listening, tell us, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, I'm super happy to be here, Rob. It's awesome to finally meet you and Lach. So my name is Andrew Bustamante. I am an ex-CIA intelligence officer, and I currently run my own business called everydayspy.com, where I teach spy tactics and spy tools to help everyday people.
Look, there's so much to unpack. I mean, we've got a long list of questions and topics that we want to get through today, but discovered you through the Lex Fridman podcast. I think it was 3.5 hours long, and I was glued. For someone who does podcasts, we do podcasts every day. For us to sit down and consume that much content in one,
he was obsessed. He
I sent
me
you
so many
things.
times. He's like, you got to watch this. You got to listen to this.
Because we talk about so many topics that we're going to talk about today, and your just lifestyle is so interesting, and we're so stoked to have you on the pod. So when we reached out over LinkedIn and you agreed to come on, it sort of blew our minds. So we went into research mode and went pretty heavy on that. But how did you?
No, I'm excited. You know, it's funny. So I just got to say, because I also have a podcast, and my podcasts are super short. I have like 15 to 20 minute episodes specifically built for people who are like, I want to give people an edge on their way to work or on their way to school. So when I sat down with Lex, and Lex generally does like a 2 to 2.5 hour interview. And then we looked at the clock and it was 4 hours later. Like, it was nuts, dude. Lex had been on an emotional roller coaster. I felt like a big jerk. Like I had just totally just beaten this poor guy up. But at the end, right before we turned off the recorder, I realized like that he spent so much time preparing. So much of the success of a podcast really boils down to the interviewer's preparedness. So hearing that you guys went into research mode and hearing that you went deep into research, I just appreciate it. It's humbling to be the person who triggers so much excitement and so much research. So let's kick some ass, guys.
That was like an outlier for us. We're normally pretty smooth sailing.
Yeah. But hey, one of the things that stood out in that Lex Fridman chat was around, I always reckon you pulled him up on it, and he was talking about, I feel this, when talking about acting or trying to go into character. And you said, I'll stop you there. You were talking about feelings. That's not what it is. Can you go into a bit more about the concept of feelings and being a spy?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is super important, especially to business owners, right? The human brain is consistent from person to person, right? We at CIA, we don't call people. We call people just an amalgam of pink matter. Pink matter being the brain is all pink matter, right? Technically, there's gray matter and white matter, but commonly it's the color pink in most media. But the point is, human brains, no matter what level of education, no matter what color their skin, no matter where they live on the planet, brains all work the same way, unless there's some physical issue with the brain, mental health or some sort of actual physiological problem with the brain. It all works the same. And there's two hemispheres to your brain. There's a left brain and a right brain. And a lot of us hear this in biology class. The left brain is your rational, logical brain. Think left, logical, right? There's a left brain. But then there's also a right brain, and the right brain is your emotional center. So if you think about creatives and our artists and people who are hyper emotional, that's people driven by the right side of the brain. One brain, two hemispheres, just like the earth. What happens is we spend all of our time in school and in college, even in like a home where your parents are setting rules, society sets rules. We spend all this time training our left brain, our logical brain. Stop at a red light, cross at a crosswalk, do what mom says, get a good grade on the test. But we don't spend any time training our emotional brain, our right brain. So what ends up happening when we become adults is the right brain is freaking uncontrollable. It's untrained. It's like a wild stallion or a race car that no one has practiced braking or driving. But now you're an adult. So you go around every day of your life being ruled and dominated by your emotions because it's untrained. You spent all your time training your left brain in school, but your right brain takes over. So it was really prevalent. It's really prevalent in the field. It's really prevalent in the business world, where business owners are driven by their feelings. I feel like this product is going to sell. I feel like this client is ready to close. I feel like my marketing is really effective. When you're being ruled by your emotions, you're predisposed to losing because you're not making sound decisions. You're making emotional decisions. That was a whole hell of a lot more than you asked, Rob. I hope that's okay, but that's kind of where I start.
What about the training to start learning to take control of that side of the brain? Can you go into a bit of like, what is that like? How do you start unpacking some of those things?
Yeah, so one of the first things that we have to do, or one of the first exercises that CIA puts us through to start training that right brain, is it puts us in scenarios where we have to make decisions. We have to make conclusions, and the conclusions that we make are very clearly either right or wrong. Right? Hey, here's a man holding a gun to this old lady's head. What do you do? And then they give you 4 options. Well, what we don't know is that of the options that we're picking from, 3 of those options are emotional, 1 option is logical. So when we pick an emotional reaction, then we end up finding out that what the actual storyline is, and we find out how wrong our emotional brain is. So for example, in that situation where it's somebody holding a gun to an old lady's head, maybe one decision is you take the gun from the guy, or you yell at him, stop, don't do that. Or you tackle the girl, you tackle the old lady and get her out of the line of fire. There's all these different options, but what you come to find out is that without understanding the context of why there's a man holding a gun to an old lady's head, you don't actually understand enough information to make the decision. So if that old lady is a terrorist, maybe he's supposed, and the guy is a cop, maybe this is something you're not supposed to interfere with. Right? Or maybe that old lady just had a gun on the guy and he just took her gun and now he's pointing it at her. You don't have the complete information, but in your rational brain, you end up having this emotional response: protect the old lady, attack the big bad guy. When you start to see how wrong your decisions are over and over again, when it comes to animals, when it comes to driving, when it comes to conversations, when it comes to conflict, it doesn't take long before you realize that you can't trust your own way of thinking, and that breaks you down and prepares you to adopt a new way of thinking.
If you don't always have that context, I feel like there's always times you go into a situation like you have to make a snap decision and you don't have that context. Is this a skill like any working a muscle that the more you do it, the better you get, even if the context isn't there?
Sort of. So let's take the statement that you just said, Rob. There are times where you have to make a snap decision, right? I would actually go on to challenge you and say that is in fact not true based on logic and reasoning. There is almost never where you have to make a snap decision. Almost every decision you're ever faced with, you actually have multiple seconds before you need to make a conclusion. You can take the time to stop and think. Oftentimes we feel like we have to make a fast decision when there is no rational reason for us to feel that way. If your phone rings, do you have to pick it up? No. If your kid comes home and calls your name, do you have to answer them? No, right? These are situations where we feel compelled to take some sort of immediate action, when in fact, we might be better served, and we are often better served, by taking a pause, 2, 3, 5 seconds to think, is what is the right course of action for me to take here based on the available facts. When you learn to take those few seconds and observe and compile additional facts in the area, you'll often find that the decision you make with facts is different than the snap decision you would have made.
It's crazy.
How did you get into how did the pathway for you to get into this? I feel like this is not like did you at school grow up, oh, I'm going to be a spy later on? You know, like people grow up to be, was that on the
Inspector Gadget posters on the wall?
Yeah. Inspector Gadget posters.
Oh yeah, right. Go Gadget hat, right? No. So for me, I don't know what it's like for Aussies, but in the United States, it's really common for little boys to want to grow up to become police officers or firemen or doctors or whatever else, right? So as a little kid, I really didn't know what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a dad. That was really the thing that I always wanted to be. And part of that's because I grew up under a stepdad. My father died when I was very young. I never got to know him. So I was very excited to be a father. So that's really the only goal, the only ambition I've ever had. But what ended up happening is I went into the US military. In the military, I discovered I had a proficiency in language. Now, I'm not telling you I'm good at language. I'm just saying I'm better at language than I am at a lot of other stuff. And I'm really bad at a lot of other stuff. I'm really bad at math, really bad at chemistry, really bad at physics. So when I'm just okay in language, that tells me, okay, this is an area where I don't totally suck. So let's focus on this for a little while. And then when I left the military and I had foreign languages, I spoke Chinese, I spoke some Spanish. When I left the military, I was on the path to become a volunteer, helping like starving children in Africa. And while I was on that pathway, I was kind of intercepted by a CIA recruiter who said, hey, you could go help children in Nigeria and you could go save the world, or we might have a job that you're interested in back here in Washington, D.C. And that was kind of how I was picked up. Now that's not that rare of a story. My wife was actually picked up very similarly. She was also on her way to what was, we in the United States, we have something called the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps is an outreach organization, a federal government agency that helps poor countries abroad. So both of us were trying to go into the Peace Corps, but we were both picked up and interviewed, and ultimately we applied to go to CIA. What people don't realize is that all of the undercover officers at CIA, we really only make up about 10% of the entire organization. So it's a very small percentage of people who live and work undercover. So we get recruited in all sorts of funny different ways. The vast majority of people who work at CIA are your analysts and your IT and your programmers and your logisticians, your map makers, your librarians. And most of them just apply straight up through cia.gov online like you apply to any other job.
So when you get in there, how does that happen? Like your normal reality of what you do and your family and all that sort of stuff. Do you tell people what's going on? Can you tell people anything? Or is it just like, you just have to ditch that and then just focus on the new sort of career?
Yeah, you cut everything off as soon as you start the application process. When you're going undercover, they tell you very clearly, if you want to go down this road, if you want to continue down this road, you need to start lying to people right now. You need to tell them, come up with some other reason that you're in Washington, D.C. Don't tell anybody where you're applying. Don't tell anybody you're a candidate. If you've already told someone that you're a candidate, then go ahead and tell them that you were disqualified for whatever reason, right? So they make it very clear that you have to start breaking off contact with your previous life if you want to continue moving forward.
Was that hard? You know, like was that the idea? I feel like the concept behind going down this pathway, and it has an element of lying to people that you're close to. Does that weigh on you in that profession?
Yeah, you know, it's a really good question, and it's one that I'm a little bit embarrassed to answer sometimes, because the truth is that for me, I'm always very future oriented, and there are different types of people. Some people are history oriented. Some people are very present focused, and some people are very future oriented. I am a future oriented person. So I'm always thinking about tomorrow. I'm always thinking about what's next. I'm always thinking about the next exciting new thing. So when the agency approached me and said, hey, you basically have to drop everything you've ever done, cut off any friendships that are anything less than incredibly important personally, and start all over again. When I heard that, I had no issue doing that. I had no issue lying to mom and dad. My sisters didn't have any reason that they needed to know. Telling them the truth would have put them in immediate danger anyways. So what's the point? For me, I was very focused on, wow, my best years are ahead. Like the most adventure, the most excitement is ahead. I don't need to hold on to anything in the past. And the whole purpose that the present exists is just to prepare me for this awesome future. So for me, it was very easy to cut those ties. For a lot of my peers, they also had an easy time cutting those ties to move forward. But that's because we went through a very heavy psychological battery before we ever got to that point. They don't recruit people who cling to the past. They actively and intentionally recruit people who are willing to let go of everything they've done, everything they've built, and start all over again.
And is your support network fellow spies? Like you mentioned, you met your wife. Is that where you find that connection because you're all going through similar things in different ways?
Yeah, that's exactly right. What ends up happening is when if you've ever been a soldier, if you've ever been an EMT or a first responder, what ends up happening is you grow very, very close to the men and women serving with you, serving to your left and to your right, making the same sacrifice, the people who understand the challenge of the job, and they also understand the reward of the job, while everyone else just kind of becomes like they become muted. It's like the whole world turns black and white around you. It's just not really that interesting anymore. And the part that's in vivid color is the mission that you're on and the people who are on that mission with you, because it's your life at stake. It's their life at stake. It's other people's lives at stake. And there's a richness to that that just doesn't exist when you clock in at 9 o'clock in the morning and go through a bunch of emails and fill out a bunch of administrative reports and clock out at 5 o'clock. It becomes very easy to separate yourself from the outside world and become very focused on just your peer group.
Is it something about the energy, the adrenaline, all that sort of stuff? What's the thing you most enjoy about being a spy?
It's actually the opposite. The adrenaline is one of the things that you learn to not trust. Because when adrenaline spikes, if you think about how your body works, your body has to go into a fight or flight situation before the adrenaline is dropped through your pituitary glands into your body. So right away, if you feel the effects of adrenaline, you know that you're under some kind of significant stress, fight or flight. That's the opposite of what professional intelligence officers want. It's not like the movies. In the movies, everybody wants to watch James Bond or Jason Bourne pull out their weapons on a boat in the middle of Venice at high speed, and they're shooting bad guys on both sides, right? And it's super exciting and everybody looks good, and the bad guys can't seem to hit James Bond, but James Bond doesn't miss them at all. So that's the image we all have in our head. The truth is, if a real life spy gets to that level, they've done everything wrong. There's no way that you can just go ghost. There's no way you can disappear into the crowd when you're the tall, Caucasian, handsome guy who's got 4 guns and you just jumped off of a boat that's riddled with bullet holes. There's no undercover anymore. So for us, we learn to distrust adrenaline, and we learn to trust the cool, calm, like level-headed collectiveness of a steady heart rate, 65 beats per minute, steady breathing rate, body temperature that's maintained, because that's how you know you're in control of the world around you and not the other way around.
You mentioned like James Bond movies or like Jason Bourne, and I feel like because people don't really we don't get to hear and unpack things like what you're talking about now. Like, what is the actual job? I can imagine it's not as sexy as it is in the movies, but like, what's it like going in? Because I can imagine I'm sure there's different durations of missions and things, but being undercover, I can imagine there's a big element of long-term stuff. So you're doing long plays. Is it boring? Is it just like being on call?
Do you hate is it your cover legend? Sometimes you're like, oh, this is just a shit cover, but I've got to do it. It's 2 months or whatever.
Yeah. So, I mean, a little bit of everything you're saying. So in reality, you're right. There are different types of missions. Some missions are short, some missions are long. And then the duration of the mission and the sensitivity of the mission is what dictates what type of cover you're going to use. If it's a very short mission and it's low stakes, then you might not even have a real cover. You might just lie about your name for the day, right? Maybe today your name is Gus or William or Bartholomew, whatever. You might just lie and walk into a bar and say, hey guys, my name's Will. I'm really excited to be here. And that's it. But then if it's a more complex mission, that's when you might find yourself deciding to don a more complex alias. You'll have a fake driver's license or a fake passport. You'll have maybe a business card or a website that is your business. It's not really a business, but it is a real website that somebody built for you. And then for the really long-term missions, you'll have a full, deep covered dossier that's all fully backstopped, very, very protected. You'll have had multiple people help create, real world fabrications of brick and mortar businesses. Your whole family might be fabricated, your entire history, your education, diplomas, credit cards, all of it.
Do you have to study that like a test? Like how are you, when you're learning about, is it like, I'm going to cram this, or am I like, how do you make sure that you're not going to, because I feel like we play a game like that
bad
now.
Actors that you're
We
doing,
fuck
yeah.
up a couple of facts and there's no outcome. You know, if
Yeah.
you get something wrong there, there's potentially like a lethal outcome or a huge political scandal or something like that.
So this again goes back to the pink matter in the brain that we were talking about earlier, right? So human beings actually have a very high tolerance for error. And I know that nobody wants to admit that, but that's the truth. You and I, by nature of being human beings, we are actually very forgiving creatures. So if you're talking to me and I tell you my name is Will, and somebody from across the street yells out to me and they say, "Hey, Andy," and I look in that direction, you just saw me answer to somebody else who called me Andy. But you're not going to challenge me about my name, because as a human being, you're just going to think that there's something going on that you don't understand. And it would be ludicrous to think that this person isn't using his real name. And you're cognitively, what you're going to do is your brain is going to experience something called cognitive dissonance, two pieces of information that contradict. And when it hits that dissonance, it's going to automatically override the thing that you think is least likely. And it's going to only record the thing that you think is most likely. That's why so many people do the wrong thing, because their brain, when their brain is given two options, the brain naturally chooses the option it prefers and essentially erases any memory of the other option.
So how do you get caught then? Is it like patterns, like like if you've done that a few different times, they'll be like, well, fucking hang on. There's something in that, like that, you know, is that how they start to recognize something like that?
Yeah, so then there's two strategies that we have to defeat the pattern, right? The first is a strategy that we have for actually building a lie. There's an actual formula, a recipe for how you build a lie. And you build a lie not by picking something that's totally different, right? If you're from Australia, or if you're from Western Australia, you don't want to create a cover where you're from Ireland. That's hugely different than where you're actually from. Instead, you would just pick something that's 10% different. So maybe you're from Western Australia. So in your alias, you're actually from Eastern Australia. That takes away almost all the pressure of your accent. It gives you familiarity with the country. But it's not accurate. If someone tries to find you in Eastern Australia, they'll never find you because you're actually from Western Australia. So the same thing is true with your name. If your name is like Justin Carter, you might choose an alias of James Cameron. So the initials stay largely the same. So now when you when you write your signature, or when you tell somebody your name is James or Justin, now it's so close that if you accidentally say something, if you accidentally answer to the name Jason when you're supposed to be Justin, or if you accidentally sign a receipt Jason when it's supposed to be Justin, it's easy to kind of to hide the mistake, because people don't notice those small detail-oriented mistakes. And if they do, the human brain automatically overrules, because of that dissonance that we talked about earlier. The brain of the observer overrules the mistake. It's only when you have repeat errors, like you were talking about, lach, when you have repeat errors over and over again, then that's a sign of someone who's not a professional liar. Professional liars are trained to pick up our lie the first time we make a mistake and then never repeat the same mistake twice.
So what about like something like, in terms of telling the narrative, and if you're truthful in a way where because you're so truthful and you're so open about certain things, people wouldn't question you on certain things that you're trying to maybe hide. Is that like a tactic that people use?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So what you're doing there is you're creating a pattern of behavior. It's an artificial pattern of behavior, but it's interpreted by the human brain, by the observer. It's interpreted by them as a pattern of honest behavior. So if you act honest and you act open, and if you answer questions quickly, and if you appear unthreatened and welcoming and warming, what ends up happening is it takes the threat center of the human brain and it neutralizes the threat center of the brain. So then the person who's asking you those questions, the person who's engaging with you, they start to subconsciously feel comfortable around you. And with that comfort, they assume that you are being honest. They assume that you are being truthful. So if you can deliver a lie, not just with a straight face, but if you can deliver a lie with a smile, if you can deliver a lie with a chuckle, you're actually disarming the other person and taking advantage of like a cognitive cycle in their brain that makes them want to trust what you're saying.
And the intent of trust is around building relationships to gather access around secrets or information. And is that an element of like, I would sit there if I got one, you know what I mean? If I was playing,
in your head, are you going, oh, got that one? Like,
do a little fist pump, you know, like
whack it in the notes.
A little fist pump, like, yeah, I got that one done. I built the trust, I got it done. Like, is there an element of like, how do you not, it's obviously staying in thing, but if you do well, I feel like that would be when I'd blow it. You know, the emotional response. Gloating, yeah. Tell him, hey, I got you there.
Yeah.
Is there any element of that?
Yeah, so what you're describing is a little bit of, it's called celebratory behavior. And one of the things that we learn to do is control that behavior response. So what ends up happening is that a lot of people don't experience dominance in their everyday life. Most people actually feel like victims. You've heard of victim mentality. Most people actually experience day to day the feeling like they are being defeated at work, defeated in business, defeated in the house by arguments with their spouse or debates with their children. So most people actually feel defeatist. So in those moments where they have celebratory behavior, they don't have control over the right brain, which drives them to have an emotional response of a fist pump or a high five. Remember how we were talking about adrenaline? Adrenaline is something that drops whenever you have a fight or flight response. The opposite of adrenaline is called dopamine. They're both chemicals that exist inside the human brain, and dopamine is a feel-good chemical. So whenever something good happens to you, you're hit with a shot of dopamine, almost like a drug. That dopamine makes you feel good, it triggers the right side of your brain, and then it makes you be like, boom, fist bump, high five, gotcha, sucker, right? That's the dopamine at work. When you are trained to systematically dominate your life, which is what spies are trained to do. We're trained to dominate negotiations in business. We're trained to take control of conversations. We're trained to seduce people we want to seduce. We're trained to win in every situation. So what ends up happening is we don't trigger the same dopamine hit because we're not surprised. We're not celebrating our victory. We already knew we were going to win. So what that allows us to do is then get to the finish line. We get after the whole mission is over, and we look at everything we've just collected, all the secrets that we've stolen, the fact that we got in and got out without ever being caught, without anybody even realizing we were there, right? And we turn all of that intelligence over to a policymaker or the president, who then goes on to outmaneuver North Korea or neutralize a threat from China. That's when we sit back and we give each other a big high five, because that's when we do have and allow ourselves to have that dopamine rush. When we realize not that we had a win in a moment, but that we just shaped the future of global politics by the operation we just completed.
Can you go into a bit about building an artificial relationship? Like, what goes into it? What's your approach? How is it done?
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody knows what relationships are, and most of us have multiple genuine relationships in our life: relationships with friends, relationships with family, relationships with a romantic partner. And then some of us also know a little bit of what it's like to have a less than genuine relationship. Maybe you're dating Mr. Right now instead of dating Mr. Right, right? Or maybe you're sleeping with a girl because she's willing to sleep with you, not necessarily because you brag about her in front of your friends, right? So we all know what it's like to have a less than genuine relationship. But what very few people understand is that you can create an artificial relationship. An artificial relationship means it's a relationship that is not at all genuine to you. It was systematically created by you, but it is interpreted as fully genuine by the other person. That is what an artificial relationship is. It's created, it's generated by you, but appears by all observation as genuine to the other person. We need, in espionage, we need artificial relationships because they allow us to get the secrets and the access to people and places that we need without ever putting us in the position of being at risk with genuine vulnerability inside a relationship. Because all personal relationships have real vulnerability. You talk to your guy friends, your true guy friends, you talk to them about your problems and your fears and your issues. We all talk to our spouses about our deepest, darkest fears and worries. All of those things are vulnerabilities. In an artificial relationship, you don't discuss vulnerabilities because you're never truly invested in the relationship, but the other person is. So then you take all the vulnerabilities they give you and you use those vulnerabilities to advance the relationship even further, even faster, to get more secrets, to get more access, to win your mission even faster.
Can you get that? Is it, I don't know if it's Stockholm Syndrome. I don't think it's that, but can you actually genuinely find a connection with someone deep? It's artificial, but you genuinely care, or can you just switch that off completely? It doesn't even enter your head.
Yeah, no, it always enters your head. It's not a light switch. It's a great question, Lach, because it's not a light switch. What ends up happening is it's a constant struggle. That's why we have to train, because what inevitably what happens is the more that someone shares with you, and this is super relevant in business too, the more someone gives to you, it triggers, again, another pink matter issue, another pink matter response. It triggers something called reciprocity. So when someone shares with you, you cognitively, all people, all brains, it triggers a need to give back, to return, to share equally. So that process is hardwired into all human brains. What we're trained to do is recognize when we're feeling that reciprocity and then stop it, and then curtail it, limit it, hamper it so that it doesn't get us to the place where we're building a genuine relationship. That's the big trick. In business, the people who succeed in business are the people who learn how to trigger reciprocity in their customer, because a customer who feels reciprocity, there's only one way that they can give back, and that is to buy more, to come back, be a returning customer, be a returning client, buy the next most expensive thing. So if you can find a way to trigger reciprocity in a customer, essentially you have a customer for life. It's the same process in espionage.
Hey, can you unpack how you personally have gone from being in that career profession now, running your own everyday spy, you got all the books in the world, you're out there, you got your own pod, you're building your own brand, building your own business. What made you take the leap and go down that pathway?
Yeah, so I was very deep in the CIA and spy mindset when I was at CIA. I was very much like, I love being undercover. I love that nobody knows who I am. I love that I'm ambiguously brown and everybody underestimates me. I loved it. It's so powerful to be anonymous and highly trained, because you don't worry about anything. But one day, my wife and I found out we were pregnant when we were on a mission, and we came back to the United States. We had our son, and once we had our son, everything about the way I viewed life just totally transformed. It sounds cliche, but it really did happen almost in an instant. From me thinking about it, when I found out my wife was pregnant, I was like, oh, maybe I should change my lifestyle at some point. But then when I actually had a crying baby in my arms, and it was my baby, all of a sudden I was like, I need to change something, and I need to change something fast, because I'm not going to get on a plane in 2 weeks to go to the butthole of Africa and put my life at risk and then never see my child grow up. Remember, going back to the beginning of our interview, like, all I've ever wanted to be in my life was a father. It was the one ambition I had. Now I'm holding that ambition in my arms, and I'm like, what the hell am I thinking? And when I had that realization, it helped me to unpack what my career had actually been. Because what I found is that the career of every undercover intelligence officer is really just the systematic manipulation of the organization on the employee. The exact same way that we create an artificial relationship with every asset, the organization has created an artificial relationship with us. We feel like the organization cares about us. We feel like we're special. We feel like we're the best and the brightest, and we're America's heroes. In reality, we're just a number. They've always got new people coming in. They've always got old people going out. There's always people dying. We're always going to be replaceable. And my son was the reason that I kind of woke up to that reality. And once we had that realization, my wife and I knew that it was time to get out. Getting out is a whole journey of its own. But once we actually got out, we realized that all the skills that we had been taught to use in espionage were the same skills that were making us really successful in corporate America, working for someone else, working for a big company. And then once we kind of put those two things together, again, another epiphany for us, if we could succeed in business for someone else, then we could use the same skills and succeed in business for ourselves. And that's what ultimately drove us to launch Everyday Spy.
Is it something like, I look at it like now, like you're doing this, you're talking so openly. Is it something that you have any like fears attached to being or disclosing something that you shouldn't, or talking openly, or even just the concept of just oversharing? Is that on the concept of trying to get out of the CIA, still being attached, and now this is what you do as a job?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I'm not really particularly worried about oversharing, and I'm not worried about sharing classified information, because when you work with classified information, and anybody who's listening right now who's ever carried a secret clearance or a top secret clearance, they know what I'm talking about. Classified information is the most boring information you could ever imagine. You're talking about like the nozzle velocity of a rocket. It's not the kind of thing that comes up in an interesting conversation, right? All the stuff that is, everything that is conversational, that's all information that is far, far outside of the realms of classified oversharing information. Instead, what it does is it offers a lot of context and a lot of insight that nobody knows about, because nobody talks about it. People think secrets are sexy. People who have access to secrets are always afraid of having their face get seen. For me, what I trust that my face, to my enemies, the people that I worked against, they didn't know this face. So I'm not really too worried about them being able to reverse engineer this ridiculous homeless face that I carry, right? With my ridiculous hair and my giant beard. I'm not particularly worried. But what I do fear is I fear doing a disservice or not bringing honor to the men and women who, when they had their first child, they chose to stay in and continue to serve. Because there's families, there's men and women suffering divorce, and people suffering affairs, and people going through substance abuse issues and mental health issues because they stayed in the job. It's a huge sacrifice. And then of course, there's plenty more who are healthy and normal and successful, but they also are making the sacrifice of missing birthdays and missing funerals and missing bedtimes to keep us safe. I'm very honored to have a chance to show publicly how much I appreciate those people, because it's something that we don't often think about. We don't think about the invisible sentinels out there protecting us. ASIS is a very capable intelligence service, and there are people making that sacrifice right now for Australia, just like MI6 is doing for the UK and CIA is doing for the United States.
Our partner of the show, Heaps Normal, is a non-alcoholic beer. The question we ask all our guests is, what's your version of Heaps Normal? What's the thing that you turn to when you're looking to get some energy back in your life?
Wow. So I would love to turn to a non-alcoholic beer, except most non-alcoholic beers in the United States do not taste good. Most beers made in the United States, unless they're like microbrews, they struggle to taste good. But when I need energy, man, I turn to water and I turn to sleep. Those are the two things that they always guarantee a pick me up. If you'll take a nap, or if you'll drink some water, your body likes both of those options.
I like that.
I like that. One thing you mentioned on a few podcasts that I was listening to last night when we were doing our research is you spoke a lot about connecting with criminals and having that connection of, that just sense of like you understand each other's world and the manipulation and all that sort of stuff. I look at stuff like, I talk a lot about like Charles Manson and stuff like that, like looking at the dark arts and sort of seeing how did things like that happen? Is that something that like you still to this day look at all these different types of people who've done things throughout the world and history and see what they've done and what works? And do you study that sort of stuff?
Yeah, to a certain extent, there's a lot of reflection and study that goes into people who are outside of the bell curve. Remember, everybody falls in a bell curve, and the closer you are to the fat part of the bell curve, essentially that's the more normal you are, the more average you are. But then there's these outliers on the bell curve, where the bell curve is really thin, not where it's fat. And the people at both ends of the bell curve are the people who end up shaping history, the people who make history and the people who shape history. So there's a lot to be learned studying and learning from those individuals. And yes, some of them are the world's biggest villains, right? Your Mussolinis and your Hitlers and your Putins of the world. And some of them are awesome heroes, right? You've got your Abraham Lincolns of the world, and you've got your Mother Teresas of the world. And if you can learn from both, because where they have commonalities, charisma, leadership, vision, tenacity, there's so much you can take from following those examples. But then at the same time, you watch where some of the dark arts have taken people too far. Like, there's a lot to respect about a serial killer. If you really think about it, they are very patient. They're very methodical. They are very deliberate with their targeting. They have an incredible ability to compartmentalize the violent acts that they're executing in their everyday life so they don't get discovered. There's something really powerful about that. Could you imagine executing anything with that kind of precision and grace? Could you imagine executing on a soccer field or a rugby pitch if you had that kind of cool, calm, collected mentality? So even serial killers do have something that you can learn from. What I end up, when I talk about this with Lex and with other podcasters, what I have found is that the bulk of people in society, they live inside the bell curve. They live inside the confines of the rules. Their brains have all been conditioned by school and Sunday school and television, and they live inside this very boring, predictable world. But criminals, they have challenged the boundaries of the normal world, and they found their way into the outside of the bell curve. They think differently. They take risks differently. The difference between a true criminal and a CIA officer isn't the way we think. The true difference is that they were never trained. They went to the school of hard knocks. They just took a risk and tried to commit a crime and got caught. We go through training so that we can commit crimes and never get caught.
Can we talk about the news? Can we talk about the impact that mainstream media has, or is it for us, like we cover a lot of the different pods throughout the last year, some big headlines have come through, like the Donald Trump stuff we've talked about, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell trial, all these sort of things where the media positions a story that you want. It's controlled and operated majority by limited people. So it's like, you can definitely see, like, when one article goes out, it goes out across like 6 different things, and it's like, it's live, and it's like they're trying to push you down to feel a certain way or respond a certain way. What impact does the mainstream media have on the way that the normal people that you mentioned in that bell curve, is that aimed at that?
Yeah, that's exactly who it's aimed at. So I really want to make sure that people understand there is no coordinated narrative from media. There's no giant conspiracy. There's no master plan. There's no deep state, right? All those conspiracies are so far-fetched from the basic reality. And the basic reality is that media and news is just business. That's all it is. They are selling a news story to an existing customer base, and they already know what that customer base wants to read. They already know what that customer base believes. They already know what that customer base is willing to buy. So if you look at a sports channel, what is the only thing a sports channel talks about? The sports. Of course, because if you wanted to learn about something else, you wouldn't be watching a sports channel. So when you go and you look at a left-leaning or a right-leaning news source, what kind of news are they going to provide? It's just like a sports channel. There is no, major push to shape the bell curve. The only push is to get the bell curve to keep clicking, keep listening, keep watching, because that's how the news source makes money. They don't make money off of offering a fair and unbiased multitude of opinions and different perspectives. They make money by getting left-leaning people or right-leaning people to buy products that are marketed with a message that makes left-leaning or right-leaning people buy that product, right? Think about how many progressives and how many conservatives buy tampons. Every female buys tampons or is a potential market for tampons. So liberal media and conservative media sell the exact same tampon with a different message. right? It's the same thing with glasses or shoes or underwear. That's who they're targeting.
How do you, for an everyday punter then, if I'm reading the news, I'm seeing things come out, how do I find a better context? You mentioned context earlier. How do I understand what the context is of navigating the different intentions behind businesses that are left or right leaning to find what is somewhere in the middle, which is the truth, the factual element?
Yeah, I love I love that you use the word navigate, because that's the best example that I can give, right? If you've ever gone, I don't know if you got, I'm guessing, I'm American. We assume everybody in Australia knows how to use a compass because you guys have a gigantic country, and we just assume that you're all excellent outdoorsmen. If that's not true, don't burst my bubble. Let me just keep assuming
it's
that
very
you're
me.
Amazing.
It's very me, mate. I'm very good outdoors.
Lach's got no calluses on his hands, mate. He's a keyboard warrior.
So when you're lost in the woods or when you're out navigating, and if you ever want to find where you are on a map, you pull out your compass and you cast an azimuth in different directions. Because if you can cast your azimuth in 3 different directions, you can triangulate your true location. But you can only triangulate your true location if you look in 3 different directions. The same thing applies to when you read the news. If you only read one kind of news, or even worse, if you only read one news source, or even worse still, if you only watch one news channel, you only get one azimuth. You have to look at an opposing news source. You have to read an opposing position, a different opinion. And then after you have 2 different opinions, you have to read a third one still. Read a left-leaning paper, and then a right-leaning paper, and then a foreign paper. Watch news from all sorts of different places. When you sit with your brother-in-law and he decides to talk to you about the next biggest conspiracy, instead of interrupting him or ignoring him, let him talk. Get that different point of view, because where those 3 different news organizations, where they say the same thing, that's what you know to be true.
Ooh. I feel like this is really interesting at the moment with like the state of maybe like global conflict, especially over in Ukraine. I read foreign news talking about how other countries outside of like Western countries are viewing this. Obviously, China and India and Belarus and things are about to go do joint military exercises over in Russia, which is making a big statement that's not really covered, especially a very small headline here in Australia. But I feel like Australia are pawns in this bigger game, just underneath whatever US and UK want to do. But keen to hear what your thoughts are on the current state of play over there. Are we actually already at war? Like, are NATO fighting Russia with all the stuff that's going on?
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario, because NATO and the Western powers, Australia, the United States, the UK, we all know that we don't gain anything. Our economies, our people, our militaries, we don't really gain anything, whether Ukraine is an independent country or whether it's essentially ruled by Russia. It's not going to change the value of the Australian dollar. It's not going to help some Australians get a job and other Australians sleep better at night. It doesn't really have any solid impact. In the United States, it's the same way. It's not really going to impact us. Now, your European countries, they have a little bit more at stake, because the longer they support Ukraine in the conflict, the more they feel pressure from Russia, because they depend on Russia for natural gas and for oil flow, right? So their energy market is heavily tied to Russia. So they feel the pinch, they feel the pain of that conflict much more than we do in the United States, or what you feel down in Australia. So because of that, the West is in this really precarious situation where the United States is largely leading the dialogue, but Europe is paying the price. And then other countries like Australia, what you guys should really be watching, what I'm hoping the Australians are watching, is not the conflict necessarily in Ukraine, but they're watching how Australian politics are being shaped by the conflict in Ukraine, because the next big conflict is going to be in Taiwan. And that's right in your neck of the woods. If actual conflict breaks out between China and Taiwan, Australia is no longer going to get to be a back field player. They're going to have to house refugees. They're going to have to host military equipment. They're going to be called on to be a leader in that conflict or in those sanctions. And we all, I mean, I'm familiar enough with Australia to know that you guys have no love lost with China. China's been a big enemy of Australia for the last 5 to 7 years, very clearly. So any conflict where Australia gets to continue to reduce Chinese influence in the South China Seas, in Oceania, like that's a good move. That's a good thing for Australia. So really, if I was Australian right now, what I would be watching is how do Australian politicians react to Western pressure in the conflict happening in Europe, because it will only be exacerbated when China invades Taiwan.
Are we heading more and more down a pathway of a higher probability and likelihood of real conflict? So like global conflict, I know there's things going on at the moment, but we're a long way removed from World War II, where a lot of things are happening. But now it's like, I see it, I got a young baby daughter, and I think about the times that we've grown up in and our parents have grown up in. It's more, especially here in Australia, it's peace and prosperity. It's a very good, high quality, low levels of potentially being, I don't know, I look back to World War I, people got conscripted and sent out to war, you know, like couldn't think of doing that or being in that sort of situation. Yeah. But from your perspective, do you think we're heading more likely towards that pathway?
Actually, no, I think the opposite is true. I think that what we're seeing, and we're especially seeing it right now with the conflict in Europe, the whole world is not committing troops. The whole world is not putting soldiers into the fight. There's only 2 countries committing soldiers, Russia and Ukraine. And yeah, there might be some radical divisions that Russia is calling upon. They're calling on favors from Syria, and they're calling on favors from I just lost the name of some of the other countries, but they're calling in favors to put like special divisions in place. But Ukraine's been asking for help, and the only thing they've gotten is a few volunteers that are willing to put their life at risk personally. There's no nation is stepping up to support Ukraine with soldiers. What that shows me is consistent with what we've seen in other parts of the world too. Look at Syria. Look at what happened in Yemen, right? Both of those conflicts are still very active, but the world leaders, they're not committing troops. They're giving money, they're giving weapons, they're using economic tools to help fight the fight, but they're not actually putting in their own professional armies to do the work. We're moving, as history is proving, we're moving in a direction where we realize that the economic benefits of conflict are high when you are not directly involved in the conflict. When you are directly involved in the conflict, the economic benefits are much less, right? So it's very beneficial to every country to pick a side and support a conflict that's outside of their own border area. But if you decide to get actively involved in that conflict, you really only stand to lose economically. We learned that in Afghanistan. We learned that in Iraq. We've seen it play out in Syria. We've seen it play out in Lebanon. We've seen it play out in Yemen. We've seen it play out in Colombia. So China is also watching that. That's why China is bolstering so strong right now. It's why they're building their military right now. They have read the tea leaves, so to speak, and now they are aware that if they get bullish, the world is going to, get angry, but no one's going to do much about it.
You're writing that down.
Before I'm writing something down in case I forget, but I want to mention something. Cybersecurity, like in terms of in Australia, we're seeing a lot of people, like even I'm looking at text messages and stuff now. Hacking's gone through the roof. I just saw something on the news last night about just these hackers with businesses paying housing, so paying invoices and like 35 grand for their deposit or whatever, and hackers are changing the numbers in the bank accounts and it's getting sent. And by the time they find out it's too late, are we prepared? Is this going to be the future world of hacking? It just seems out of control. Like I'm seeing even like the language used, like I'm almost getting sucked in, and I'm like, my parents and stuff would see this and easily just click this. Are people becoming super smart in this area, and is it happening more often?
Yeah. So what you're seeing in the cybersecurity, what you're seeing in the cybersecurity world of the everyday consumer, because that's really what you're talking about, is the everyday consumer. It's totally different than the corporation that's trying to protect credit card data, or when Google gets hacked, or when Facebook gets hacked, or when military institutions get hacked, right? That's a completely different type of nefarious actor. But for the everyday person, what we're seeing is a mix of mass attacks, meaning a hacker can create one hack, and then they can basically multiply it 10 million times and send it out all at once. So they're playing a game of numbers. They don't need you, Lach, to click on a link. They don't need you, Rob, to click on a link. What they need is 10,000 people to get the email, and maybe 15 people click on the link.
They'd be disappointed.
They're just playing the odds.
Andrew, they'd be disappointed. They'd be like, "Oh, these guys will take everything they got in their bank accounts," and they go,
they rock up to the house, take the couch.
Waste of time. Yeah, waste of time.
So a big part of what we're seeing is that it's very easy. The digital era, the digital world has made it very easy for hackers to multiply and copy and template their own hacks. But then the other thing we're seeing is that technology grows so fast, people say yes and download things without even knowing what they're downloading. Have you ever watched people stand in line and they don't even know what the hell they're standing in line for? I was at not 15 minutes before I got on this podcast with you guys. 15 minutes before we started, I was at a sushi restaurant with a couple of friends, and the waiter recognized me from one of my podcasts. And he was like, "Hey, you're the CIA guy. Can I get a picture with you?" So I was like, "Sure." And I got a picture with him. As soon as I stood up with him to get a picture, I must have had 4 other people stand up and also come up and want to get a picture with me. They had zero idea who I was. They just wanted to get the picture because they saw somebody else get the picture. And after they have the picture, maybe they'll do some research and see if it's something that they care about, right? People, that's just pink matter behavior, right? So that's exactly what's happening is we have a phone, our phone sends us a notification. The notification says you need to update your system. Okay, update, download. Oh, I'm missing a plugin for WordPress. Okay, plug in me. Yeah, let's do it. Yes, whatever it takes for me to get to my Instagram account faster. I'll just click yes as many times as I need to. That type of behavior makes it very easy for mass attack hackers to send something to 10,000 people and half of them say yes.
It's like on Facebook when you see like, what's your favorite color? Where did you grow up? Like they ask sort of personal questions and people don't know like, what's this for? They just think it's a fun game or whatever it is, but that's actually collecting data about you, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And it's funny because the most nefarious actors out there really aren't hackers, in my opinion. It's the corporations that know how to take your data and then make something out of it, right? They know how to take your data and create an avatar that is basically a digital version of you. And once they have a digital version of you, they can find your digital versions of your wife, of your sisters, of your cousins, and now they can geolocate all of you based on the data that's on your phone, and they can target you with specific discounts for ice cream shops or shoe stores or whatever else because they know your pattern of life. That is true espionage, right? That is congregating secrets that nobody knows they're giving away and then weaponizing it and making it so that you take specific behaviors based on that information.
Should we just all assume that they can see everything that we're doing? So in terms of like, you know, I see some people like believe in God, that they're watching over and all that type of stuff. I believe that there's some sort of internet God that's just collecting everything that I'm looking at, and they've got this stored in some USB drive on this massive computer system. Is that true, or am I way off the mark?
No, I would say that you're more accurate than you are wrong. You should definitely assume that everything you've ever engaged, everything you've ever encountered exists with some nuclear, some internet God somewhere, for sure. The difference, though, is that it's very unlikely that that internet God actually knows how to do anything with the data they've collected. Because there's a lot of data out there, right? Like there's a lot of data that defines who you are. There's just not enough server space for everything. And if there is enough server space to hold all of your personal data, there's most definitely not an algorithm that can quickly create something out of all that data. Right now we're at they say that data is the new natural resource. If you can remember back in the day, they used to mine coal faster than they knew what to do with it. They used to mine gold faster than people would buy it. I mean, Australia is a mining country. Like you guys know, there's always mining operations even before there's a customer for what's being mined. So that's exactly what data is right now. They're collecting it and collecting reams and terabytes of it. They don't really know what they're going to do with it yet, but they know that it will be of value someday.
Hey, last question before we let you go. A topic that Lach and I are both very interested in. Are aliens real? Do they exist?
I believe that aliens are very real. I believe that there is intelligent life out there. And I don't believe it because I've seen it. I don't believe it because I've had a close encounter. I believe it because the probability is just too low that we would exist and we would be the only intelligent life in the entire universe. The probabilities are just astronomically low. Just look at our planet. Apes are intelligent. We are intelligent. Dolphins are intelligent. Eagles are intelligent. If there's that much intelligent life here in the world, in our little piece of the earth, how much bigger is the entire cosmos, the entire universe? It only makes sense that there is intelligent life out there. Do I believe that aliens have visited Earth and that they've done anal probes and taken people away and drawn crop circles in the grass? I'm not so convinced that that's true yet. I do believe that there are crop circles, but I don't know that it came from an alien vessel. So I live in a world where I base things on probabilities and I base things on facts. So those two things make me say, yes, aliens are real, but I'm not quite sure that we would have any idea if we were to see one or if one has ever visited Earth.
Why would they want to show us that they're here? You know what I mean? If they're more intelligent than us and smarter than us, they wouldn't want to identify us and for us to see them. But it's crazy when you think about it, isn't it? Like other planets and stuff. Do you think about that shit often? Like around looking up and just going, there's surely more shit out there. There's something going on there. There's a party there. Venus is going off, you can tell.
What I often do is I really do look at the sky sometimes. I mean, I live on the coast, on the ocean in Florida. I love how the world has a way of making you feel really small. You go stand by the mountains, you stand by the ocean, go get on a surfboard and have one wave turn your ass upside down. And all of a sudden you realize how small and insignificant you really are, right? I love it when I look at the moon or I look at the stars or I look at the sun and I just blown away by how tiny we are and how much we think we control. So I do think about those things often. And if there is some kind of cool like pub crawl happening on an alien planet somewhere, if I get to join that pub crawl, that would be pretty wicked. But I'm all the happier that we're not the only idiots out there throwing up on the street corner, right? Somebody else somewhere in some other galaxy is just as bad at making decisions about drinking as we are.
Well, mate, thank you so much for jumping on and letting us pick your brain. So it's been unreal. I feel like there's a lot of people out there, especially listening to this, that
I want to become a spy.
Yeah,
I'm already going shopping. I'm going to look online.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys want to check out my website, it's at everydayspy.com. And I will say this, so Lach, if you want to know what kind of spy you would be, if you haven't found my quiz yet, go to everydayspy.com/quiz. And I actually have a 12-question quiz that will tell you exactly what kind of spy you would have been.
Oh, beautiful. A scared one, I reckon.
Failed spy.
I'm an oversharer straight up, you know.